Hello, my name's Martin Warwick. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Telecom TV in London, and I'm at the TIA 2013 event in Washington, DC in the United States, and I'm talking with Mark Walker. Mark, welcome. You are the President of Walker & Associates. You're a TIA board member, and you're also the Chair of the TIA Policy Committee. So you have at least two hats, probably three. Let's begin at the beginning and look at some stuff to do with the cloud and the way that is affecting the industry we both work in. So in order to keep up with the growing demand in the market for big data, for capacity and speed, companies are looking more and more to the cloud to support their services. What concerns do you have during this shift in the industry from managing your own data in private networks to handling some, if not all of that data, over to managed service providers?
Well, it's an interesting question because the enterprise concerns in this regard would be the concerns that the service providers obviously need to have if the service providers are going to take good care of them. And but in the context of the cloud, what is the cloud? The cloud to me is almost a marketing term that is really addressing remote data. So how do you get out that data? How do you take advantage of what can be done remotely with data? There's a lot of dynamics in play, but the concerns that an enterprise would have would be how secure is that data? How secure is access to that data? What's the continuity of that data there in the footprint that the managed service provider holds? Is it reliable in terms of the connectivity that I have to it? Are there redundancies with the data? Is it dynamically scalable? Can I get to the applications easy? Is the data footprint being managed properly? All these things are the normal things that an enterprise would think about when they have their own internal management. So when they go to remote administration or remote management, they've got to really understand the integrity of those things that the service provider is offering. So as a provider of products and services to service providers, which is what Walker does, we have to make sure that we're very good in network architecture oriented design that we do for many of the small service providers. The big ones happen to have some of their own staff to do that, of course, but for a lot of the small guys we play there, we make sure that we give them good product selection guidance, and we make sure in our effort to help them address their concerns that they can deploy these networks efficiently, both with front-end guidance and then back-end operation as needed, including legacy traffic migration onto these cloud-supported networks.
It's evident that there are new and growing issues prevailing as enterprises begin to outsource their needs for server support and infrastructure. How do you manage your customers' expectations when dealing with issues around quality of service and security you just mentioned briefly there? Is this really important? Is it a sticking point?
Well, quality of service is obviously part of that package that's being looked for in the whole picture. So there are levels, if you will, and it's kind of you get what you design for. You mentioned in there managing the customer's expectations. So when a service provider says, we believe this is what we need to go to market with, then it's important to understand, okay, what levels of quality of service are going to be offered? What levels of security are going to be offered? What interests in service level agreements are going to be provided? So naturally, the more robust that offer is going to be, the more robust the design of the network needs to be. And in a given opportunity or question that a service provider will have of us around the next network element or the next iteration of their network that they want to roll out, they've got to have very good counsel from us in order to be successful with that. So it's a matter of listening to their needs and then addressing it with the solutions we know to be available in the market. And for us, that's inside of a number of manufacturers that we happen to be very good with. It's kind of like being able to offer the Volkswagen or the Buick or the Cadillac, depending on what the need is. In the case of, say, a high security requirement, where especially the interest is put there, then we might propose a Juniper solution, because Juniper is well known for being a leader in security. Just an example.
Can you tell us about a specific example of a security concern as your customer base gets more and more entrenched in cloud services that are often, as you've already covered this once over, but it keeps coming back, it's a core issue, they're considered inherently less secure than internal private networks?
Well, I'm happy to address that because it does deserve a little bit of a deep dive. It's interesting that the greatest egresses of security that happen are those that you and I are familiar with, being LAN users. So the unwitting user opens something that allows the wrong thing to get into the network. So naturally we experience that in our internal networks. So cloud providers need to be able to address this well. So it's kind of like having a security platform at the front gate to the compound, but then also having security deep into the compound. So I think this, what we're seeing is more security deeper into the compound. So on the server or on other elements within the managed service provider's network and data footprint, they have to have different points of security so that data continuity that I mentioned is not impaired by the arrival of something that's bad from another customer within that managed service space. So it's managing the front end, and it's the data integrity of what's inside the compound and having multiple checkpoints. So you think of this as being this whole world of concern, and it is, but it's applying the same disciplines further into the network because of the potential for egress. But I will say that the folks who do these services and who offer them well are very likely to be folks who are staying upgraded regularly on what the concerns are. In other words, they're constantly looking for ways to protect because they have so much at stake. So it stands to reason that yes, there are more points of entry, but also stands to reason that there are more greater competencies in terms of security level and upgrading those securities in order to keep the fence where it needs to be.
Another question, do you think operators and service providers are keeping up with the enterprise customers they serve and their inherent demands for products that your company provides?
Keeping up, that's an interesting way of saying it. Are we keeping up? I think the answer is yes, we're keeping up as a service provider community. But how we do that will prove our success or failure in that way. The pipe is what telecom delivers. So you have all this content out there that is either coming in the form of big data, or it's coming in the form of maybe over-the-top content, things that a service provider would expect, and then surges of things that a service provider might not expect, but he has to prepare for. So it's the ability of the pipe to accommodate these things. Are carriers upgrading their pipes, keeping up? Oh, absolutely. The question is not whether they have the know-how or whether they have the desire to do so. It's just a matter of return on investment at the different times that these pipes have those requirements. You don't want to build it and they will come too far in advance of when the customers are ready to sign up, or you're going to implode your income statement. But it's just a matter of service providers being wise in this regard in how and when they upgrade their pipe.
Over in Europe, which is where I'm from, there's a lot of talk about the OTT players in the industry and the fact they seem to have been fleeter of foot, perhaps, than some of the existing service providers who have been around a while. Do you think the telecoms industry, that established side of it, is behind the curve in terms of connectivity, security and so on?
It's kind of hard to say behind the curve or ahead of the curve when I think it's quite apparent that we're in the curve. So the over-the-top content is there. It's a reality, and it's something that's great for the user, but it's something that this owner of the pipe also needs to be able to monetize in a certain way. The movement of packets costs money. You can't move things from point A to point B without having a network deployment and without having maintenance on that network and without understanding and navigating the regulations around the movement of traffic inside of that network. So all these things require time, attention, and investment. So, and with over-the-top content in particular, there's a policy item that has long been of concern for the service providers, but one that they have to navigate. And I think today we found kind of equilibrium in that. The FCC has stepped in and said, we believe we have certain powers here, but those powers have been provided in such a way that the service providers can navigate that today. We just want to make sure that in terms of the requirements for transparency and non-discrimination of traffic, that those expectations don't go so far as to prohibit the service provider from having a reasonable return on their investment as they do pass that traffic. So we will be looking to the forthcoming rules, if there are any changes, very, very carefully. Because what was presented under the banner of something that seems pretty innocuous like network neutrality can be embedded with some restrictions that make it very cumbersome for carriers to monetize the investment that they need to have in those networks. And to the extent that those rules get tough and are in some ways, while trying to protect the consumer, overbearing on the service provider, it will cause the service provider's costs to go up, which then get passed on right to the remainder or the entirety of the ICT community.
What do large service providers need most from networking product manufacturers and distributors, do you think?
I think it's an important question in terms of providing some sort of a distinction between large and small there. Because the large carriers, the large service providers, often have their own staff of folks who, from A to Z, essentially know what their network is intended to be in the future, how they're going to roll that out, what support mechanisms they need internally in order to do that, particularly at the engineering design level. So from our standpoint as a wholesaler of product and a logistics services provider, it's mostly providing product. For the smaller guy, it's providing product plus services on the front end and back end of that. So the services may include product selection guidance. What products do I need that are fitting into a network design or architecture, as we've mentioned in the past? And then behind that, after the product is delivered, now how do we deploy it into the network? Do we have to integrate it well with other products? Obviously. Do we have the expertise to do that as a service provider? They have to ask themselves these questions. So we, as a not just a wholesaler, but as a what we call a value-added distributor and a technically oriented consultant to those service provider customers, we try to give them the A to Z of success potential so that they know what's available to them on the front end and they know how to deploy it on the back end, including the cumbersome task at times of migrating their legacy traffic onto these new networks, where we're not talking about TDM, we're talking about packets, and we're talking about software that is meant to now manage the network differently from the way we did in the past.
Mark Walker, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.